So, now I kind of make up the stories. There are a ton of stories sitting in the back of my head that are various lengths. And a lot of times I'm just waiting for somebody to say, oh, we've got this thing over here. We need a 10-page story. I want to make sure I've got a 10-page story, back there.
So when's the next time we're going to see you actually doing the artwork for Hellboy? And especially like the path that's Hellboy, or you're taking it in right now, or is he he's going to be around for a lot longer, or I'm getting worried. I don't know if you're wrapping stuff up.
He's we're not that close to wrapping stuff up. We are extremely close to some major changes with the character. Really close. The plan right now is that Duncan Fegredo will draw 2 more miniseries, which will actually be combined into one book. So Duncan did Darkness Calls, he did The Wild Hunt, and the 3rd book in this trilogy is The Storm and the Fury. But we made a mistake on the last one where we did an 8-issue miniseries, and it had to have a huge gap in the middle. So the reason The Storm and the Fury is called The Storm and the Fury is so it can be published as 2 miniseries. The Storm, 3 issues, and the Fury, 3 issues. So Duncan's halfway through The Storm right now. Then he'll do the Fury, and then, having done some amazingly huge, life-altering things to Hellboy, I will step back in as the artist. So whenever Duncan's done, that's when I get rolling on my bit.
Hi. I know a lot of writer artists with their own creations bring a lot of their life experience to their work. I was wondering if a vast tentacled creature has attacked you and thrown you around the room, or that kind of thing.
Not so much. I had no interest in doing stories about laundromats and growing up in Oakland, California. And I'd rather draw monsters. But that said, my personality is all over that book. And as I've become more comfortable writing, there are more and more things I put in there that I can kind of go, I don't know why I'm putting that in there. Should I, logically, it would make more sense if it was this, this, or this, but my personality dictates that this happens. So I'm trying to be truer and truer to that inner voice, and eventually I turn it all over to my shrink and she'll tell me what it means. But right now I don't want to know. So I'm just trying to do what I do. And I've been very fortunate that it's a relatively commercial book. Somehow, despite all the things I've done, it's still a relatively commercial book. So as long as I get to do what I want to do, the more you get away with stuff, the more you go, well, if I got away with this, then maybe I can get away with this. So, thank you.
Aside from your work on Hellboy, do you have another favorite superhero or other comic book character?
Not as far as things I would want to draw, no, not really. I mean, I've kind of, I grew up reading Marvel Comics. I will always have a huge affection for all those Jack Kirby, Stan Lee characters. But most of that stuff doesn't exist anymore in the form that, it existed for me as a kid. So there's very little that would appeal to me outside of my world as far as something to draw. And also, as I get older, you start becoming very conscious of time. And right now I have more stories and pictures that I want to draw than I'll ever be able to do. So Craig Russell told me years ago, he had been offered some kind of X-Men annual or something, and I think he agreed to eventually ink it. But I said, well, why didn't you draw it? And he said, because I've only got so many pages in me. And if I spend however long it's going to take to draw that graphic novel, or whatever it was, that's whatever number of pages of my own work I'll never do. So my feeling is, I want to use whatever energies I've got to do my stuff. And which is again, going back to like the film and stuff. Guillermo asked me to work on The Hobbit for a much longer period of time, but that's too much time away from doing my work.
Somewhat similar to that, I know Hellboy is influenced by H.P. Lovecraft, and Boston here is rather Lovecraft County here. So I'm just wondering what some of your favorite Lovecraft and some of your favorite Lovecraft influences are.
Well, yeah, Lovecraft is kind of, I think people use Lovecraft as kind of the buzzword for that pulp magazine stuff. It wasn't just Lovecraft. There were a lot of guys that were kind of swimming around the same pond at the same time. Robert E. Howard and Clark Ashton Smith, and these guys all kind of fed on each other. So yeah, I'm very influenced by those pulp magazine guys from that period. There's no particular Lovecraft story that kind of springs out as the thing. I mean, I really like Lovecraft, but I'm actually a bigger fan of things like old Victorian ghost stories and that kind of stuff. I've read so much of this stuff, and I like so much of it, it's very hard for me to be very specific about this guy or that guy. I'm just a big fan of that period of literature from actually even the early 1800s through the pulp era. I read very little contemporary stuff.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering, what was it that made you choose comics as the media that you expressed yourself in, as opposed to like animation or painting or writing alone or something? And also, what's the minimum number of hours per day that you have to work in order to feel like you've accomplished anything?
Well, I was a comic book fan, and then I kind of got out of comics when I went to art school. But still, I knew what I really wanted to do was draw monsters. So somewhere on the end of art school, I started thinking, well, where am I going to go where I've got a good chance of drawing monsters? And comics was it. I don't know anything about animation, and I was never really a huge fan of animation. But I knew enough about animation to know that it's a giant workshop full of guys. So I knew I wasn't cut out to do that. I didn't want to spend, a year drawing a guy walking through a doorway, which is what animation is. Man, I remember when I was up at Disney, I went down and visited one of the guys I'd met. I went down to his cubicle, and he was showing me what was going to be 6 months' work for him, which was Mulan turning and saying something over her shoulder. Oh my God, wow. And he had broken down what her dialogue was, so to syllables. So he could do her mouth, doing the no. So even as a kid, I knew I didn't want to do that kind of thing. Comics, I don't even remember making much of a choice. I wanted to draw monsters. Comics seemed the place to do it. What was the rest of the question? Yeah, I work all day, and some days, at the end of the day, I throw the stuff away. I still work pretty much 7 days a week. I keep saying, well, I'm gonna be semi-retired, which means I'll cut it down to 6 days a week. I have no idea what I'll do with that 7th day, because my wife, I'm sure, will say, well, go back in the studio, because we're used to not seeing you. We like it. Do whatever you want in there, but just leave us alone.